Hey everybody, Maxim here for yet another episode of Remote-Rated Essential Advice. Each week, I speak with leading remote founders and CEOs to uncover different stories, tips, and tricks for operating remotely just a little bit better. This week, I'm lucky enough to be speaking with Shiloh Johnson, the founder and CEO of ComplYant. So I'll hand the microphone over to Shiloh. She has a really interesting and cool story, being a pretty rare individual, which is a solo founder, and one that's done it remote first. So Shiloh, thanks so much for joining me today. I'll let you introduce yourself here.
Hi, thanks for having me. Yep, I'm Shiloh, the founder and CEO of ComplYant, and ComplYant is business tax software to help the early entrepreneur understand exactly what they're supposed to pay in US tax and when and how, and take them from day one all the way to full compliance.
Very cool. Yeah, one of those classic problems that people don't think about until it truly does become a problem.
Exactly.
So Shiloh, I'm really interested to hear, I think it's always interesting to see startups that were kind of remote before remote was cool, to put it in that way. Obviously these days, most everyone is, but would love to kind of hear, a little bit of the story. What kind of prompted you to build the company the way you did, and what kind of factored into that decision to kickstart the company as a remote first startup?
Sure. So I come from very traditional corporate. My background is in accounting and taxation. So I've worked in corporate tax teams for companies like Technicolor and Airmark and American Homes for Rent, just all these bigger, I've worked for Intuit, all these super large sort of traditional corporate companies. And in that space, I used to tell myself, when I start my business, I am never doing this. All the things, I used to make lists of things I hated about the corporate culture. And part of that too is I'm a parent. So I was a young parent. I worked my way through school and full-time student, full-time worker, full-time parent, doing all of these things. And the corporate culture was so rigid in structure. It was like, show up at 8, you cannot leave until 5. I don't care what's going on. The house can be burning down, doesn't matter. This is your schedule. You take your lunch at noon and you do the same thing every single day. And it was just so suffocating. I felt like I was literally just like dying on the inside every day. Like I just was this sort of robot. And then I live in LA and I have my entire life, and I would commute. So one of the jobs I mentioned, I worked all the way in Irvine, and I would drive every day from the center of LA to Irvine. And if you know anything about Los Angeles, talking about an hour and a half, commute one way. And just one of those days driving home, listening to one of the millions of podcasts you get wrapped into on those long commutes. And I was just like, I can't do this anymore. This isn't effective. And I knew then, anything I did on my own, that was going to be the catalyst. So day one, I had a tax firm before this, and the firm was entirely remote before COVID and before remote was cool. And then when we started ComplYant, which was pre-COVID, we were fully remote. It just will be a thing I will always do. While I do think there is value in person, it's not enough for me to shift my thinking.
Exactly. No, I really like the way you said that too. This, because I think something we see a lot of in the discussion on remote configurations and remote leadership, of course, kind of creates this really polarizing binary discussion, of like, in person is either terrible or it's awesome or vice versa. And I like the way you said it there, where it's like the value isn't enough, which is evaluating this trade-off, which many of us have experienced, myself included, where you start to really take a more careful look at these things and you wonder, well, I would, in San Francisco, when I lived there, I also now live in LA, in San Francisco, I would jump on, a bus, I would jump on a train, I would go all over the place for these in-person interactions, which sure, they were valuable. But then I took a look, about, each day, maybe easily 3 hours of my day just spent listening to podcasts on public transport, not feeling too happy, not necessarily feeling too safe. And it's like you compare that to the productivity you have by just not doing that, and it's becomes a no-brainer. So
Absolutely.
So something I would love to kind of hear a little bit of your story about is having kind of booted up this remote first startup, like what has been the experience so far in building the team? I had the pleasure of getting to meet one of your employees, and would love to kind of hear like how have you thought about like finding the right people and interviewing them, onboarding them? What has that process been like as a solo founder building something from the ground up?
Yeah, I will say this is the part where in-person sort of shows its worth, in the sense that you don't get the opportunity to read body language. You don't get the opportunity to get, a physical face-to-face connection like you would in an interview if you were actually sitting with the person and talking with them or taking them to lunch, and sort of this personal connection. You do miss that. Absolutely. I 100% see the value in that. But what we've been able to do, I think early in, is just really setting some clarity around what the company values are and how specifically, a certain type of personality works well in the environment. I think when companies aren't clear about that and all they say is remote, and there's no structure around what type of people they would like to, apply for the position and make sure that they're getting the right fit, I think that's where businesses suffer. They're just saying remote and that's it. There's no guidelines, there's no personality fit, there's no nothing. And we spend a lot of time creating organization around how we even advertise jobs, and making sure people understand we aren't just saying we're remote, we 100% live this life. And if you're the kind of person that needs the interaction, this isn't for you. We're not going to go back to anything. It's just, we were remote before, this is what it will be. And so making sure we have a lot of clarity around what types of people we want to make sure are applying for the roles we have open. That was super huge. Having clarity around our values and communicating that really early was really important into sort of hiring. But it's been good. I think what you find, what I have found, is the most valuable candidates have been people who really understand the value of their time and how much they're willing to almost sacrifice pay so that they could have the freedom to work when they want, without the pressure of sort of this restricted life that they can't live anymore, especially during COVID. I mean, it worked perfectly in the sense that some of my staff have children. Some of them have small children. They wouldn't have been able to work a regular 9 to 5 and help their kids with school and, keep them entertained and keep the laundry done and all the things. So we just really offer a more of a fluid work style. And that has really worked really well for us in hiring.
Absolutely. No, I think that's a really interesting distinction to make, this idea that you really have to be prescriptive about what kind of remote company you are, and what kind of things, do you most value culturally, and, what's kind of the distinct flavor of remote that, an employee or team member can come to anticipate, so that there is that alignment. Because I agree, it comes in many different flavors for sure. So I'm interested to hear, obviously, you guys have not been around for years and years and years, but you also have been around for a little bit of time as well. And, I imagine, like all founders, there are different things that you maybe would look back on and you're like, oh, do this a little differently, or maybe take this pathway, as an alternate. Wondering if there's anything that comes to mind for you as far as like either things you do differently, things you would definitely not do differently, or like when you look to the creation of the company from a remote perspective, like what things would you have doubled down on for sure, or what things might you have done differently that stand out?
We did a little bit of this, very little bit. We still are kind of doing it. And as more products, come to light, we try to keep a pulse on what other tools are happening for the remote space. But I would have doubled down earlier on remote technology. I think all we had early days was just like Zoom and like obviously email. We didn't really have, and Slack, of course, but I wasn't really actively looking for tools to make sure that my team was able to connect on many different, platforms. So we did eventually, and we started to get, we have like a culture tool called Kona. We have, all kinds of stuff, ClickUp and Trello and all the things. Early in, we were just sort of piecemealing it. I would have doubled down earlier on that. I would have went and actively looked for more tools. Because that's the thing, when you're remote, you really have to have your thumb on effective technology that encourages communication and culture building, because that's what you miss when you're not physically able to sit there and game plan. So I definitely would have doubled down on that earlier for sure. I think we did really good at setting hiring practices for sure. I knew really early what I wanted. That was a major plus, and I would have, doubled down, do it even further. I literally was jotting out like, how was I going to be able to attract top tier talent and offer them packages that like was attractive more than just money? Because as you know, when you're early startup, you don't have a ton of money. So you're like, how do I hire good people? Offer them things other than money, obviously work flexibility, hardware, Amazon credits, all the things that, you think you can do that are within your budget range, and that are realistic. And I spent a lot of time writing that out before there was, one employee. So that was really important to me was, I call myself like a self-proclaimed employee cheerleader. Like that's what I am as a CEO. My job is to be there for them. Their job is to be there for the company. So I have to do everything I can to support what they need. And I spent a lot of time writing that out early. Definitely a double down, just making sure you're never too early to write out, a realistic plan for how you'll attract talent and making sure that your company, your team is happy ultimately, because just giving them the freedom to work almost isn't enough anymore. Everybody
Absolutely.
is giving their employees the freedom to work. So you're trying to be creative about how you offer those benefits. Definitely a double down on that for sure.
For sure. No, and I think that's it's such an important call out, this idea that, you have to be really prescriptive and really kind of detailed and specific about how you're implementing technology as a remote company, understanding like what you're using for what tasks and what kinds of communications live in which channels, and how should employees think about engaging with these different things, escalating certain things, documenting certain things. And it's been one of my learning lessons as a remote executive is like where I feel I've failed in the past is where I didn't do those things, and where I feel I've really just like leveled up the team is where quite the opposite, where I'm incredibly specific about like here's what we use this for, here's the scenarios where you wouldn't use it, and like really guiding people so you're always operating efficiently. And
Sure.
and certainly what you said echoes the advice I've heard from every CEO I've spoken with so far, which is this idea that it's really never too early to start thinking about the tooling that powers this stuff and the culture that sits within that, like how are you being prescriptive about the values and the mission, and how the company thinks about itself. So important for sure.
Yeah.
So something I would love to kind of learn a little bit more about. You mentioned you mentioned one app that you've used in the past, for kind of culture related things, and I'm curious kind of what things you've either put into practice or you've seen that have kind of caught your attention, and like good ways to kind of engage with the team, like if you're kind of making any rituals or routines to kind of pull people together and keep people feeling connected.
Yeah, absolutely. So I am anti-meeting, which sounds so weird because as a CEO, you feel like you're in a meeting every 5 minutes. But I just we are really careful about the cadence as to which we have meetings. Like if it's something we can put in Slack, let's have it in Slack. So that I think was one big piece of making sure like the culture sort of starting the cadence is just making sure we narrow down the cadence as to which we have meetings and not just an overabundance of conversation just for conversation's sake, and then structuring how those conversations happen, making sure we have like agendas. Is this a true meeting or is this just I want to get together and chat? The other thing, making sure that we do, like we try to celebrate every holiday that is major or important to any member of the group, because those are obviously screen time, but it's off work. So we can chat, and it feels less pressury. So that has been a thing that we've implemented. But actually, ClickUp, we put our entire onboarding process in ClickUp. I've seen a lot of people do it in Notion too, but we just did it in ClickUp, and it has been just top tier excellent. It's literally our entire onboarding process, from technology we use to who is in what department, to how those people like to be communicated with, to what tools we use, to everything in between. So ClickUp has been a really important tool in sort of navigating communication, whether it's tasks, and then that also minimizes the meetings. So if I'm in ClickUp just wanting to make sure, hey, what's marketing working on? I don't need to ask marketing. I just take a gander at ClickUp and it's done. And as a CEO, I try not to, I'm not a micromanager at all. Everybody's management style is different, but I am not a micromanager at all. I want to give my team goals and then the freedom to execute those goals however they think it can be done, with some oversight, but that works really well for me. And then communicating that that's my style and constantly communicating it, whether it's in ClickUp or Slack, is a really, really important thing, I think, for everybody coming in and currently with us. We all try to do that equally. Feedback, we run a feedback loop, and we don't do it in meeting because that just makes meetings go longer. We do, You can provide anonymous feedback, you can provide, focused feedback, and then we have also clarity around how people want to receive feedback. So we do a lot of work around making sure that as a communication tool is like working. And then we only do meetings. Sometimes we'll do short, like quick Zooms if we just have a quick thing we want to talk about. It's too long to actually type. But yeah, that's sort of the communication cadence and the expectation too. We have every other week, all hands, and that's the extent of it. We're like not very much. We're probably not the example, the communication example. We are. I'm very much. I want people to feel inspired to commit, grow, and develop whatever department they're in. I don't want them to feel stifled by such a rigid set of requirements and communication rules and sort of like step by step. I think it hinders the creativity. It hinders people's ability to be innovative and to clearly think and to own the thing they're working on. Yeah. So you mentioned an employee that we have that you met, Erin. She owns marketing. I don't hover. I just like go and do. And she does. And she's brilliant. And she'll come back with all these ideas and all these creative things. And then, of course, we tweak and we mold. But I think you're freer to sort of invite this almost entrepreneurial environment. We very much have an entrepreneurial culture in the business. So that's how we like to structure communication. I'm not a meeting girl. We don't have them.
Absolutely. No, and it's certainly kind of, I think it pushes things in the direction of like truly autonomous, asynchronous work, which I think is ultimately a big strategic advantage, and it was actually something that kind of caught my attention as soon as I got connected with ComplYant was, seeing, the employee you mentioned, being, I believe in Pennsylvania, and you, of course, being, here on the West Coast. And, the time zone difference immediately stood out to me. And I was like, I bet they have some interesting thoughts on this, because, it's an essential ingredient, especially if you're looking to take advantage of, hire best talent wherever they are, regardless of the time zone, which is, really, really interesting stuff. And I want to kind of pivot, you've made mention of quite a few tools, and it kind of pulls up one of the super practical questions I love to ask, which is kind of what's in like the, week to week or day to day kind of personal technology stack. Like what products and tools are you using, on a day to day basis? And if there's anything you've discovered recently that was either like a real game changer or, something that, you wish you'd dove into earlier.
So I mentioned this Kona. Kona is actually new. They are, I think their former name is like Insights or something, but they're currently now renamed as Kona, and it's a culture tool, and it integrates with Slack. And basically it's a sort of an emotional cadence check-in with your entire team. And then the managers of the departments get sort of the report back of how everyone's, doing that day. Was having a good day, bad day, medium. It sort of replaces what you would get in body language visibility if you were like physically sitting there and you saw someone slumped over, their head down on a desk, or all those physical cues you get when you're working with someone. It's that sort of technological replacement. That was a game changer. I am in a founders group with the founder, and she was talking about the tool, and I'm like, oh, we totally could use this. That was definitely a game changer. The team really loved it, and it's connected enough without being overbearing, which is, I appreciate, because when you're fully technologically based, it's really hard to read emotional cues. So if someone's having a bad day, they're not typing, I'm having a bad day, they're just having it. But the expectations as the founder or the manager or whatever are still the same. Like deadline is Friday, needs to get done. You don't know that, their mother is sick or their dog died or all the things that are happening in their personal life, and you can't physically see it on them. So Kona was our moment to really level that up a bit, especially for me. So it gives you cues when they're coming into a meeting with you. It'll tell you what their emotional cadence is that day, so you know how to receive them coming into the meeting. So if they're on a yellow or a red, you quickly know they're not having a good day, and you can adjust where you are, seeing where your team is. And for me personally, that has been a game-changing tool. Obviously Slack runs our life. Email can't go anywhere without Microsoft 365. I'm looking at all my tools now, that's why I'm glancing to the right. Calendly, I honestly, uh, just super clutch. I love that tool. I take meeting after meeting after meeting, and it's just so wonderful. ClickUp I mentioned, which we love. We literally run our work cadence out of ClickUp and our check-ins, everything. So that's been great.
Yeah, some
Um,
great
what's that?
suggestions for sure. And I kind of wanted to dive in a little bit on,
Oh yeah.
that whole importance of, like the kind of culture, like mood
Hmm.
check-in element of things.
Yes,
I
yes.
think it's such a underappreciated part of effective
Mhm.
leadership in the remote world. It's like this idea that, if you're in an office, you can kind of quite literally like put your arm around someone, check in with
Mhm.
them. And I've certainly found like it's something that can either make or break, an employee experience. It's like just being able to quickly check in and figure out like hey, like felt like you were a little off earlier. Are you doing
Right.
okay? Like what's going on? And keeping those check-ins going. So very cool
Yeah,
that you found a
absolutely.
tool that straddles that fine line where it's like you don't want to be excessively asking people and
Yeah.
feeling intrusive or micromanaging, but at the same time you do want to make sure you never miss those opportunities to take care of people when they are down. So I'll certainly be taking a
Yeah.
look at that one.
Sure. Yeah, it's worth the gander. They're really great. We love it.
So my final question, which I always love to kind of leave these interviews on, is if you were either talking to yourself before you started this, or you were talking to another founder who's looking to start a remote company, what advice would you give to someone who's looking to kind of step into a remote leadership role for the first time? Like what comes to mind is like something you're like, I wish I knew this when I got started, or
Um, Not so much I wish I knew this because I did a lot of work around like leadership and making sure I was sort of as equipped as I could be. But I will say what people probably don't do enough of is really like if you can get a really good executive coach, I recommend it. Especially an executive coach that hyper focuses on like the remote workspace and startup workspace is worth every single solitary penny because they really hyper focus their content and what they're teaching you and supporting you with as the CEO based on the environment we're in and how to build and maintain and grow and level up your team, and they really help you focus in on like that culture building stuff that we think is like buzzwords, but honestly it's the make or break. I've had people say, I took this job, it wasn't even paying as much as this other job I got, but it's so great. I took it. So there, and you really get the win. Like when you're again a new startup, you don't have the money to pay people, five and six and $700,000 or whatever the going rate is these days. So what you get is you get to create an environment people want to be a part of, and the best way to do that is by getting support and making sure that you, especially if you don't know what it means to be a startup founder, get help. Talk to people, talk to former CEOs, current CEOs, people with large companies, smaller companies, people who failed. Talk a lot to people who failed, figure out what they didn't do right, where they missed the mark. Hiring is probably, I think, the hardest job about being a CEO. So you know talk to people about it and make sure that you are constantly getting that information so that you can sort of build your own network or your own bowl, so to speak, of your own environment, because even though it is virtual, this is our office. Slack is my team's office, and I want to make sure I'm providing a space where they want to be every day and they're happy that they get to contribute to. So get as much support as you can for that. That probably
absolutely.
would be my advice.
Yeah, no, really excellent advice and super practical because, of course, like I've been a founder in my past life too. And, even with a co founder, even with in person employees, I found it to be, a frequently lonely experience, and I think
Yeah.
that's one that many people can relate to. And, I've never started a remote company, and I can imagine that just 10x is however lonely it can feel. So that idea of
Absolutely.
having like your kind of personal advisory board to support you,
Yeah.
is so critical.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Fantastic. So bringing it into the finish line here, Shiloh. Where can people find you? Where can they find the company? And where should we point these people to?
Oh gosh. Me personally, I'm probably on Twitter the most, and it's just Shiloh Johnson. ComplYant you can find at complyant.co, COMPLYANT. The Y is for you because we built this business for all of you. And we're on all social medias at ComplYant app. So yeah, that's how you can find us, and reach out to us if you have any questions. We're happy to be here for you and support you however we can.
Excellent. And you'll certainly find those links in the YouTube description, and certainly highly recommend connecting with Shiloh, checking them out. Sounds like they can solve a lot of problems for a lot of people. So thanks as always for joining us here at RemoteRated Essential Advice. Hopefully you'll join us next week as always, where we keep the conversation going, figuring out ways to do remote better, faster, cheaper, and hopefully a bit less stressful. So Shiloh, thanks so much for joining me today. And to all the viewers, thanks for joining us.